So in the previous lesson, we have discussed the topics of modals, and right now let's move on the hovers, because hover effect is also a very common use case which you need to do. And here comes one trick. Because you might already know, but Cypress does not have any native hover functionality. But don't worry, it can be done with simple Cypress workaround. So let me show you in this lesson. So again, let's go and create new spec. So I'm gonna go back to specs, create new spec, and I'm gonna name it hover. And let's click create, and we don't need to run it. So go back to the editor. Again, let's take our references and copy and paste it inside hover on the top of the file. Now let's change the description to something like Cypress hover. And let's give it a description for our test. And let's give it something like, let's test hover workaround. And for this purpose, we will again need to go for our practice automation. And as you can see, if you scroll a little bit down, we have this hover page. So let's click on that. And as you can see, if you move the mouse over here, it will trigger the hover effect and it will change the text into "you did it." So let's automate this in Cypress. Again, step number one is to grab the URL and let's paste it inside visit function. Step number two is to actually perform the hover. And like I mentioned previously, there is no sci.hover function. You can actually check that out. If you do something like hover or press just H, there is no hover. So how can we actually do it? So let's go back to our website and inspect this element. And as you can see, it's an H3 with ID of mouse over. So let's take the ID. And of course, we need to start with a get. So now we start with getting that selector. And here comes the trick. If you want to do the hover effect, we need to actually trigger the mouse over effect. And luckily for us, Cypress gives us something called trigger. And we have some options which we can actually trigger. In our case, it can be mouse over. Just like this. And now we can actually write the assertion, because when we get that mouse over, so let's type it again, we can actually verify that we get the text of "you did it." So let's change the assertion of should contain, and the text value was "you did it," just like this. And now if we run the test, it should hover over that and perform the assertion that the hover has been successfully simulated. So let's save it. Let's go back to the test runner and find hover spec and click run. And as you can see, we have successfully automated. We have used the mouse over and we triggered the mouse over effect. And after that, we asserted that the text has changed to "you did it." Again, this was a pretty simple solution. Luckily for us, the Cypress gives us the option to trigger some events, just like mouse over. And maybe for that reason there is no hover functionality. But I know that a lot of beginners have been confused because they wanted to work with hover and they didn't find any hover functionality inside our Cypress object. And for that reason, I thought it might be a good idea to show you it early. And you know that whenever you need to do hover, you can simply trigger the mouse over effect and it's done. Again, simple one-line command. And that's why we love Cypress, because it makes a lot of complex stuff done very easy. Very often you will need just one single line command, just like this. Same with assertions, when we can actually chain the commands with the assertions, and everything is done nice and simple. So again, just one last recapitulation. There is no hover function in Cypress. You need to get the selector which you want to hover over, and then trigger the event and call the mouse over value inside that event. So that's all for the hovers.